All right, that's it. So here we are. The Torah reading scheduled for this Shabbat is Parashat Vayishlach, and it begins in the Eitz Chaim Chumash on page 100,
198.
thank you, 198. And this is Genesis Bereshit, chapter 32, starting with verse number 4. And the Torah portion has a number of, what can I say, very interesting, provocative, troubling pieces to it. The whole beginning part is Jacob is at the brink of returning home. He's at the kind of at the crossroads, the Ma'avar Yabok, the Yabok crossing, where he's going to come into the land of Canaan and try to come back home. But he knows that before he gets there, he's going to be passing basically through the territory controlled by his brother Esav. So he's going to have to face literally his brother Esav. So that's his opening situation, with all of the trepidation that's involved, and the famous story of him wrestling with the angel and his getting his name changed. And that all takes place before he actually meets Esav. When he meets Esav, actually the meeting goes so much better than he imagined. And Esav turns out to be very magnanimous and friendly and loving. And he offers, he says, he's completely letting the past be the past. And he invites Jacob with his whole family entourage and flocks and sheep and animals to come visit with him. And he says, "Oh, that's so gracious. We will, sure, yeah, we will." And of course, he never does. And he finally goes, he keeps on going home. He lands up in Shechem. He's still on the direction of going home, but he's not home yet. And in Shechem, we have the notorious episode of the abduction of Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and then the massacre that happens when Levi and Shimon decide to take revenge against all of the inhabitants of Shechem, and they basically wipe out the town. And how we're supposed to relate to that, of course, has been subject of anxious controversy for millennia. Okay, anyway, after that, God reaffirms Jacob's new name of Israel. And then they keep going, and we have the final son of the 12 sons born to Rachel, and this is Binyamin. But tragically, Rachel dies in childbirth, and she is buried on the side of the road. She's not buried, significantly, she's not buried in the cave of Machpelah, where all the other patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. She's buried out there on the side. And after that, they bury Isaac. And Esav comes with Yaakov, with Yaakov, to bury their father Yitzchak, Isaac. And then the last section of the Torah reading, a long section from page 216 to page 220, is devoted to giving us a name by name, line by line catalog of the whole dynasty of Esav and all of the people that were born to him and that were born to the people that were born, to next generation, and the kings and the leaders. It goes on and on and on and on, giving us a very extensive picture of a flourishing household and a flourishing people. And Yaakov's story, of course, has to wait until next week. And then next week, we'll get back into the nitty gritty of Yaakov's story, which is handled quite differently and has all kinds of stuff that becomes part of our national sacred history. So that's it. That's my summary of the entire Torah reading. Okay, so does anybody have a particular, that's, our standard question. Anybody have a particular piece that they've noticed that they want to try to dig into? And I see Sarita.
Yeah, I'd actually like to look at the meeting between the brothers.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else agree with that? Okay, so good. And I also agree with that. I think that that's a good idea. And let's see what we come to see when we get there. We start, in order to actually get to the brothers meeting. That's on page 203, starting with chapter 33 in Genesis. Chapter 33 in Genesis. Hold on a second. I'm going to try to get rid of this. Okay, good. Now we shouldn't hear any beeping. Okay, so who's going to read for us? Anybody want to wrestle with Sarita and see who's going to prevail?
I'll
Okay.
read.
All right, Sarita's going to read for us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept. Looking about, he saw the women and the children. Who, he asked, are these with you? He answered, the children with whom God has favored your servant. Then the maids with their children came forward and bowed low. Next, Leah with her children came forward and bowed low. And last, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed low. And he asked, what do you mean by all this company which I have met? He answered, to gain my Lord's favor. Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours. But Jacob said, no, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please accept my present, which has been brought to you, for God has favored me, and I have plenty. And when he urged him, he accepted. And Esau said, let us start on our journey, and I will proceed at your pace. But he said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. If they are driven hard a single day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I travel slowly, at the pace of the cattle before me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. Then Esau said, let me assign to you some of the men who are with me. But he said, oh no, my Lord is too kind to me. So Esau started back that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed on to Sukkot and built a house for himself and made stalls for his cattle. That is why the place was called Sukkot.
Okay, stop here. Good. So that's the encounter and then the separating afterwards. So, okay. People's reactions and so on, people's comments. What are you noticing here? Sarita, you started us off with this. What was it that made you want to look at this?
So I know that there's just so much bad press that is always given to Esau, and here, I mean, he's willing. He's coming here. And he's greeting his brother like, wow, I'm so happy to see you. In spite of the fact that Jacob didn't treat him well before. And yet it's like people always wanting to look at everything Esau does as if it's like suspicious. And if anyone is sort of not wholehearted here, it's Jacob. I think that I sense some reticence on Jacob's part. And so I think that, you know, the way that each of them is viewed, and yet based on what their actions, I just, it's troubling to me because it doesn't seem based on the way they actually are.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in on that point? Okay, so, so that was a real conversation stopper. What can I tell you? Yeah, the whole, I mean, we've talked about it this, you know, different times when we looked at last week's Torah portion over the years and this week's Torah portion. You know, what do we make out of this rivalry between Esav and Yaakov, and the conviction that we have that Esav is just a terrible villain. Just, you should know that we are actually involved in this part of the Torah by coincidence in our Zohar studies, and the Zohar sees the opposition between Esav and Jacob in the most extreme black and white that you can imagine. Esav is the personification of evil. He can do no right. He's terrible. And you know, the whole survival of the world and the survival of goodness is all at stake by, you know, that you know, when that Jacob has to, you know, outsmart him and so on. That's the solid long story of the Jewish people. And actually, if you look even in the prophetic tradition, it's already there as well, that Esav is demonized in the prophets. And when we read the Haftorah for last week, for this week, we see that. So what gives?
So it's here too. So under the line, the commentary on line on 4, the verse he kissed him.
Right.
It talks about that. The commentators are divided as to whether Esav's hugs and kisses and kind words were genuine. The Masoretic text has dots over the words he kissed him, indicating there was something unusual about them. Some are reluctant to credit Esav with any decent motives. One Midrash says everything Esav ever did was motivated by hatred, except for this one occasion, which was motivated by love. So, I mean, what gives here? Yeah.
So that's one thing you should notice on page 204 at the top of the page, where it says Vayishlach, the third line, the third word on the first line of the page. You have, you know, dark dots on top of the letters, and those are found in the Torah scroll. Those dots are, you know, put right on top of the letters of that word Vayishlach, which means, and he kissed him. So, you know, again, the verse is, and Esav ran. You can read it again, you know, verse 4.
Esav ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept.
Right. So it sounds very emotional and sounds very, very genuinely, you know, accepting, loving, and whatever. So that's what the comment says is that's the challenge. When he kisses Esav, when Esav kisses Jacob, what do we make of that? If we're so convinced that this guy can never do anything right, then even that kiss will prove that he's a mamzer, right? Look at him. He's trying to get around Jacob. He's trying to, you know, to seduce Jacob to think that he's helpless when, you know, that he's innocuous. Then he'll get him to come to him, and then he'll murder him. You know, you can't trust him at all. The other way of reading it is unbelievable. Look at this. This is Esav, who was wronged so terribly by Jacob and who wanted to murder Jacob. And here we are 20 years later or so, a little over 20 years. And he's a changed man, and he's ready to kiss his brother and let bygones be bygones. So that's, do you want to be amazed or do you not want to be amazed? How convinced are you, or how afraid are you of this person that you're looking at? So first of all, just historically, Esav is not really being judged as Esav, the individual. Esav, just like Jacob, and that's the end of the Torah reading. The end of the Torah reading for this Torah portion tells us Esav is not Esav. Esav is a people. Esav just stands for being the beginning of a people, just like Jacob is the beginning of Israel. And in that sense, Esav becomes Edom, and the Edomites are a constant enemy to the Jewish people. So what we do is we retroject our animosity, our fear, and our loathing of this enemy people back on their patriarch. Their patriarch is Esav. So Esav becomes responsible for all of the evil that Edom was guilty of as a people. And that's already in biblical times. And then it gets worse, because once Edom becomes a symbol of a nation that's out to get the Jews, Edom becomes the symbol of Rome. And then when Rome becomes Christian, Edom becomes the symbol for Christianity. So throughout ancient times into medieval times, up to the present moment in certain communities, Esav is never Esav. Esav is always judged by what happened subsequently in history and how Edom, the Edomites, or the Christian, Roman culture was out always to destroy. They destroyed our temple. They destroyed, the Jewish people's hold in the land of Israel. And then, then when it becomes Christianity, the whole terrible history of Christianity. So everything is being read here in hindsight. When we look at Esav with those kinds of very, very suspicious and even loathing kind of glasses, it's because we're looking at it from backwards. If you have just if you just read the verses, you don't get that at all. It's totally neutral. There is some depending again on how prejudiced you are. The Torah doesn't like hunters. So Esav is a hunter. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. And obviously Isaac also doesn't think there's anything wrong with hunters. He thinks that his son Esav as a hunter, that's a great thing. You're going to bring me, the best choice, game that you're going to be able to catch. But again, in terms of Jewish tradition, the idea that that's how you kill animals was repugnant. And it was, to use an anachronistic word, goyish. So there's a little bit, of something to hold on to within the biblical text, but almost nothing. And it really is the product of subsequent historical experience that changes how we see him as being not just an individual living in his own life at his own time. And that's, of course, one of the important contexts for reading the Torah altogether. The Torah, certainly the whole book of Genesis, but yes, even later, is always working with, I'm not telling you the whole history of the world. Forget about the fact that it's not a science book. It's also not interested really in telling you world history. It's talking about inflection points. What changes in world history? Abraham is a world historical figure, even though, nobody ever heard of Abraham when he was alive, right? The Chinese people didn't know about Abraham, and the Vikings, or he's pre-Vikings, but and in Africa nobody ever heard of Abraham, and in the Americas nobody. And yet Abraham changes world history. So the whole Torah is really about a certain commitment to looking at those people who the Torah presents as carrying two realities: their own individual reality and their cosmic significance, their cosmic historical significance. They change the world. They make the world a place that's either better for God or worse for God. And those are the people that are focused on. And then there are the people that are the more or less heroes, the patriarchs, with all of their foibles and with all of their frailties and failings. And then and they're committed to somehow push this blessing up the mountain, no matter how many times it rolls back down again. And they're the people who either don't get it or really don't want to get it. And the most charitable way of looking at Esav is he didn't get it. He didn't know. He didn't really get what was going on. He was just a Joe Schmo who doesn't understand what's at stake here, and therefore he's not leadership material for being a patriarch of Israel. If you want to go further, then he becomes not just oblivious, but actually antagonistic. And that's part of our choosing how to read, because we don't read just in isolation. We don't read these stories just for their interesting psychological insights like in a novel. They represent historical forces. So yeah, it's a big struggle. I think today we have the luxury of retrieving, of salvaging that more positive possibility. I think that it was impossible for Jews for centuries to actually entertain the idea that, yeah, maybe Esau was a really good guy. I think it was just completely beyond the ken of people for generations upon generations. And we live, thankfully, with all of its challenges, we live in a world where we can look at Goyim as human beings. And for a long time, we couldn't. And there were good reasons why we couldn't. But it was a loss. And it was a loss for them, and it was a loss for us. But now we have that possibility. And that is a very significant change. So, I don't know. Anybody want to comment on any of this?
Yeah. One, I guess, I get, that we in fact are not, when we make a joke about how don't look ahead, right? But I think it's like coming to conclusions about something without actually looking at what's written. I mean, in so many places, right? You have cautioned us really, don't come to that kind of judgment, and look at the text, and you look at the text, and you look at the previous, the stories where Esav loses his birthright, and not through anything that he did, and now you read what's here, and it's it sounds very positive. So I think it's disturbing to me to think that of these thoughts about him that do not seem grounded.
So let me add a little more negativity to Esav's bio from the biblical material, and that is, we know that he makes his parents' lives miserable, that they are upset with him because he marries the local women. And so what's so bad, right? So that would be a modern question, but that's not a question that the Torah thinks is trivial.
Right.
It's clear to Rivka and to Yitzchak. Yitzchak is more silent about it, but Rivka is very verbal about it. And again, the background of Abraham making sure that Yitzchak would marry somebody that was not from the local people. Apparently, again, the best way to read it is Esav is oblivious. Esav just doesn't get it. He hasn't absorbed what's at stake here. He hasn't absorbed this heavy sense of responsibility that seems to be carried by Abraham and Sarah and by Rebecca and Isaac. He doesn't get it. And that is, again, so is ignorance innocuous, or is ignorance like, where have you been? Have you not sat at our dinner table every night and we talk about this? Haven't you, come with us to the altar and we've offered, our sacrifices to the God of Abraham and prayed for, for a different world? Where are you over the last, 40 years of your life, that this is what you end up doing? As and then you don't get it if we don't think that's good. So obviously this is a heavy topic for contemporary Jews, but again, putting ourselves back in that context, this was a no-brainer, and that's what it was. It was a no-brainer. Esav is guilty of having no brains. So either that's just, well, he's just a shmendrik, or he really is willfully, being a rebel. So that counts for a lot at this point. The whole book of Genesis struggles with the issue of family loyalty. And it's not just about family loyalty in the abstract sense, but family loyalty for a family that has a sense, like I said before, that the whole world's history will depend on this family doing its job. So, if Esav doesn't get it, then, like I said before, you can be as charitable up to a point as you can be, but he really doesn't get what is at stake here.
So that's interesting that you raised the issue about family loyalty. So yes, there's this sense of destiny. This is a family with a destiny. And pursuing that destiny, right? Taking it, to where it needs to go. It seems to me that in fact has posed a tension with family loyalty. I mean, Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac, perhaps for a sense of the destiny, that doesn't show family loyalty. Similarly, I mean, what Jacob may have, and his mother may have conspired so that Jacob would get the birthright because he was probably
not the birthright, the blessing.
Right, the blessing, right. The blessing.
Esav gave up his birthright.
Right.
Can't blame anybody else but himself. Another episode that right. Doesn't go to his favor.
Right. So they may have conspired to have Jacob get the blessing because he was the one who would be carrying on the destiny, but that doesn't really show family loyalty in that sense, And if any and yes, in response, Esav, did threaten Yaakov, but here he seems to be putting family loyalty first. Okay, I'm going to put behind me whatever my brother did. This is my brother, and so so in terms of family loyalty, it seems to me that it's Esav who is really showing family loyalty. And it's juxtaposed, it's really an interesting juxtaposition where Esav is coming and he's coming first. He could be, he's coming first. He is putting himself out and sort of even willing to be vulnerable. And then you look at what.
Wait. He's got 400 armed men with him.
Yeah, but they're behind him. He's not having them come before him. He's out in the front. What I'm thinking about is how Yaakov has, now Yaakov did come out in front, but if you think about how he places his concubines, wives, and children, right, he puts the least favored forward, maybe putting them more in jeopardy. So this issue about, being willing to be vulnerable for family versus, I don't see the evil here. I mean, in Esav, yeah.
No, I'm not arguing with you about that. You should see evil here. I'm just saying why there is this whole tendency to put on a certain colored glasses and then view everything. Yes, on the face of it, there is no evil here. But I also want to say that this whole family loyalty thing is very complicated. It's not quite, A or B. Alan.
I think no, and I think it's interesting that we're seeing this in our lens, etc. I don't think Asaph saw it in this way at all. I don't think that he saw that he lost anything by giving up the birthright or the blessing or whatever it was for the bowl of soup. He's showing up with 400 men. He's obviously got a powerful army. A third of the portion that we're reading is a verses describing Asaph and his lineage. He's obviously very prolific in terms of what happened to his destiny. We got 12 Shmendriks that came out of Yaakov, but he's got all these other guys. I mean, by his own sense of self, he didn't need,
He did okay.
He did okay. He's fine. What do you don't worry about me. I said, great. It's easy for me to be nice to you because I'm king of the world.
Marty maybe knows this joke. It's a and I'm gonna a little bit butcher it, but it's a classic joke. So it's some Shmendrical Jew is trying to get ahead a little bit, and he comes to America, and he's what is he going to do, and what is he going to so one person says, what, they need a shamus in the shul, maybe you'll be able to get a job there. So he goes to the shul and they say, well, do you know your aleph base? Can you sign your name? He goes, are you kidding? No, I don't. I was poor. I never was able to even go to cheder and everything. So they say, get out. We're not, forget it. And then he goes and he finds a shmata on the street. He tears it into 2 shmatas. He sells the 2 shmatas. He buys 4 shmatas. He ends up, going from Michael el Chayil, from strength to strength. And finally, he's a multimillionaire. And they're interviewing him for the paper, and they go, so Mr. Lefkowitz, no offense, how do you explain your success? He goes, I think if I would know how to write, I never would have made $1. I would have been a shamus in a shul, right? This way, thank God I'm illiterate. And now, I'm the richest guy in town. So, so that's a little bit an Asaph kind of story, the way you're seeing it. So now Marty's aroused. Yes,
you're right. You butchered it.
I did. I know.
No, but why was Asaph so opposed to initially accepting the gifts?
So I think
because eventually he obviously took the goods. I have another question, if I may, getting back to something Sarita said about family and relationships.
No. First, let's do the easy one.
Okay, please.
The easy one is, I see it as very standard. Here I have a gift. Oh, no. It's totally unnecessary. No. Please take it. Okay, thank you. I mean, I think that's what you're doing is what you're having there is the gracious conventions that, are part of a kind of a give and take. When one person is trying to be nice to the other, and the other person is in a position of quite power. The guy is in a very real sense a force to be reckoned with, and he's trying to be magnanimous. And he says, no, I have plenty. Yeshli Rav, I have so much. Don't worry, it's okay. And no, please take it. Okay, for you, I'll take it because I know it. Otherwise you're not gonna. You'll feel bad that you weren't able to give me something. So that's how I see that exchange.
But doesn't Asaph then have to give him a nicer gift? I mean, that's what Margaret Mead said. Right. My second question, if I may.
Yeah, let's get to that one. Yeah.
Gets back to what Sarita was saying about these family relationships. And she went back to the Isaac, and the sacrifice there. But presumably Abraham spoke to God.
That's what it says.
And so if that's the case, how do you value Sarita, whom I love very dearly, not as much as Lou, obviously.
And not as much as your family.
Right, exactly. But how do you value, a family relationship versus someone who speaks to Hashem? I mean, I would think that has precedence.
So let me put it in a different way. and this is what I was trying to get at when I say family loyalty is more complicated than just being family or God. I'll use a different example first. I'm going to come around like this. We just saw a very interesting mini series on TV, Showtime, and it's called The Good Lord Bird, and it's based on a novel written by something McBride. What's his name? Bruce McBride. I forgot. Who's an interesting writer. Comes from Jewish and African American parents, and he's written memoirs about it. And this novel that he wrote is about John Brown, the abolitionist, and it's written from the point of view of a Black youngster who is liberated by John Brown and then ends up spending the next few years following him around in all of his things, all the way until the tragedy at the end. So it's written from his perspective. But so John Brown was, at the time seen by many people, certainly by most white people, and actually probably by most Black people too, as a Meshuggah. He was talking to God all the time, and God was telling him that Black people should not be slaves, and that it was a terrible sin, that we're all created, B'Tselem Elokim, we're all created in God's image. And right, the Good Lord Bird, you found it?
James McBride.
It was
James
McBride,
McBride.
yeah. He wrote
Yeah.
The Color of Water, which is the memoir.
Right, that's his memoir, right.
Yeah.
And he's written a bunch of novels. So he's a good writer, and he's got this very interesting background that he is fueled by. So anyway, in this story about John Brown, so John Brown in the end, he goes through marauding through Kansas and this and that and the other thing, and he tries to start the Civil War before it starts. He was in a certain sense a prophet, but at the time he was considered a terrorist, a murderer, and a Meshuggah. He has family, and most of his family follow him to their death to fight against anybody who is pro-slavery. So there's the question of family loyalty. He ends up killing his children. He ends up bringing his sons to death because he chooses to do all these things that end up, and in the end, at Harper's Ferry, it's like hopeless. And they almost all die. One guy is, I don't want to get into that story, but the point is the family loyalty that the sons could have run away. The sons could have, they were adults. They could have said, Pa, you're nuts. And not only that, but if you loved us, you wouldn't be doing this. And they don't do that. They drink the Kool-Aid. And their family loyalty is that they will fight to the death with their father for this great dream. So family loyalty works in many different kinds of mysterious ways. We're going to have in the Torah reading, the whole, abduction of Dinah story is about another. How do you balance out family loyalties? Jacob says to his two sons, you just massacred all these people. What's wrong with you? And they said, well, we're sticking up for our sister. So was that good family loyalty or bad family loyalty? At the end of his life, Jacob curses them to death. He says, I don't want to have anything to do with you two. So it's very tricky. I'm not trying to give an answer for all of this. I'm trying to say that family loyalty in and of itself doesn't only show one way to go. And how you identify with what the family stands for and then be loyal to that is also a big question. And in that sense, Esav didn't get that that's what the family was about. So, these are complicated kinds of negotiations. And that's a little bit what I was trying to say in the Torah Sparks. That we don't shirk this is, I think, quite extraordinary. Because this could be a skeleton in the closet that nobody in the family would ever want to talk about, like the Dinah story, for instance. Or here, where Esav seems to be a gentleman, seems to be a forgiving man. And we have a text that when you read it fairly, that's what Sarit is saying. When you read it fairly, our patriarch Jacob doesn't come up so so great. And here we are telling this story as a sacred story.
It's revisionist thinking,
Which is the revisionist thinking?
Sarita's view.
But
Although I agree with her.
it's not just revisionist because it's been a problem for thousands of years, right? Everybody has a problem with Jacob. Everybody has a problem with what he did with fooling Isaac, from the beginning. And guess what? The rest of his life, the Torah itself says that he has a miserable life, that where underhanded dealings and deceit are a theme that he suffers from. And many traditional commentators say, yeah, this is called, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. He's getting paid back for what he did wrong. So there's a lot of sensitivity to this stuff, and realizing that it's so complex, that it really is. And to me, that's why this is amazing, because we could have just completely whitewashed everything or forgotten the troubling parts. We could have made a story. We could have added all kinds of elements to the Esav character to make him an easy to hate villain. We didn't do it. Yeah.
So I'm also thinking that, there's a lot of conversations today about, the founding fathers of our country and the fact that they're not perfect people. Whose statues do you keep up? Whose statues do you take down? And from my point of view, and perhaps it's because, my upbringing is to have the patriarchs of our, of our people not be perfect people. To me, that's perfectly acceptable. I mean, it doesn't take away their accomplishments. It's just that they are human beings. And they make an awful lot of mistakes. They also did some really good things, and being able to handle that nuance. I guess I feel like I grew up with that. And so to me, recognizing that George Washington, wasn't a perfect person is not a hard thing to do and doesn't undermine his importance to our country.
Right. But think about it as national stories, or even again, think about it as family stories. The skeletons in family closets are not usually, or in many cases, that's what it is. It's a skeleton in a closet. You don't bring it out and talk about it every Thanksgiving as your founding story about, this wonderful Greenstein family. It's got, we're made out of, we horse thieves and philanderers and serial murderers. That's who we are. You don't tell those stories. If somebody, messed up, you talk about the other person who didn't. The idea that you're doing this kind of nuanced discussion is not so, it's not. In the early times, George Washington couldn't tell a lie, and that's all we knew about him, right? So and the whole waking up that we have now about this one, had slaves, and this one had whatever, we didn't want to hear about that stuff. The dream of America that 70 million people to this very day subscribe to has nothing bad to say about those people, right? Doesn't, that's a lot of people. So it's not to be taken for granted that seeing nuance and complexity is easy. It's not easy. Look at all the other, look at what's going on in the rest of the world. It's really very hard for people to say, our leader, has clay feet, but still, everybody invests in pumping up people, beyond their human capacity, right? So that's, I think that's really, very much what this is about. And coming back to Jacob, one of the things that we see again, Jacob is in a lot of distress. Jacob is besieged. within his own heart with a sense of what am I doing? What have I done? And so on. At least that's one way to read it. If we want to read Esav charitably, then we can also try to read Jacob charitably. And whatever the necessity was, and his mother was absolutely convinced that this was the only way to go, whatever the necessity was of Jacob doing what he did to get the blessing, he has a sense that, you know what, Esav has every right to be angry at me, and Esav, who knows what the heck, and that's the, many people who read that wrestling dream or that wrestling vision when he's wrestling with an angel. He's wrestling with his conscience. He's wrestling with his own sense of worthiness. Did I do things the wrong way? Do I really deserve this blessing if that's the way I got it? He's asking, what?
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And it's very interesting, we have only a couple of minutes. If we look back at a verse that you read, verse 10, and then verse 11.
Okay, verse 10. But Jacob said, "No, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably."
Okay, so that's number one, right? There's this, and we don't have time to look at it, but if you go back, just for a half a second, go back to page 200, chapter 32, verse 21 and 22.
"And you shall add, and your servant Jacob himself is right behind us, for he reasoned, if I propitiate him with presents in advance, and then propitiate him, right, with presents in advance, and then face him, perhaps he will show me favor." And
Okay, okay, one more, go ahead.
So the gift went on ahead, and while he remained in camp that night.
Okay, so unfortunately, again,
This is he.
Jacob.
That's Jacob.
This is the preparations before they actually meet, right? So the poetry of the Hebrew is missing in the English. In the Hebrew, it says, "Vamartem gam hinei avdecha Yaakov acharenu." Your servant Jacob is right behind us. That's what he's telling the messengers, the malachim, right? Which is, of course, another loaded term.
Right.
So through the gift that is going before me, I skipped the line, right? Ki amar, achapra panav, right? I will get atonement from his face, right? Panav bamincha, through the gift that goes lefanai, before my face. Yacharkein er'e panav, and then I will see his face. Ula yisa panai, maybe he will then lift up my face, right? Vata'avor amincha al panav, and then the gift passed over his face, right? And then he went to go sleep and wait for the terrible encounter, right? So this whole thing about the face, and then we come back to the verse that you just read, verse 10, and in the Hebrew it says, right? Take my mincha, take my gift from my hand. Ki alkein ra'iti fanecha kirot henei Elokim vatirtzeni. Seeing your face is like seeing the face of the Almighty. And what do we have when we have the wrestling match? The wrestling match happens. I have seen God face to face, and he talks about he calls the place Penuel, and then. Verse 11, the translation here is so disappointing. Kachna et birchati. The translation, please accept my present. The word present has been used already, mincha. Here it doesn't say minchati. That's in the previous verse. V'lakachta minchati miyadi. Take my present from my hand. Here it says, Kachna et
Birchati.
Birchati, my bracha, my blessing.
Last week.
Yeah.
From last, right. He says, I'll give you anything. Take it. It's yours. I'm ready to relinquish the whole thing. And then Esav goes, no, stop panicking out here. Stop. Get a hold of yourself. You're all right. I'm all right. You know, and like Alan was saying before, I feel fine. I'm okay. Now you be okay with your portion. And that's the challenge that Jacob has to struggle with all the time.
And that makes Esau even better.
In this standing, in this encounter, he's the one who's operating out of a full heart and generosity. Absolutely. Yeah, and then we have to close it off. Yeah, Marty.
I'm reading Rashi, in which it says here that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, quote, "It is a tradition well known that Esau hated Jacob.
Right.
However, his compassion was moved at that moment, and he kissed him wholeheartedly," which would suggest that he kissed him wholeheartedly, but not sincerely.
No. He kissed him wholeheartedly, but a fleeting kind of wholeheartedly, but it's not something that lasted. The tradition is halacha Esav sones Yaakov. That's it. It's an ironclad law.
You know,
Esav hates Jacob.
but
in this particular moment, again, to use a terrible analogy, all through the Shoah, there are stories here and there and here and there, right? Millions and millions and millions of people were murdered, but every once in a while somebody says, you know what, this particular guard, this particular whatever, for a second, his heart melted and he let me go. That's what Shimon Bar Yochai is saying here. This guy is a murderer. He's terrible. He wants to destroy the people of Israel. But at this particular moment, his heart softened up. That's what Rashi is quoting. He's quoting a midrash.
I read before too. And
right, and that was in that other note.
If there's any evidence for that, yeah.
Right. All right, Yesha Koach. I'm going to stop here, and God willing, see you next week.